Welcome to the survey presentation on the project about student experiences while purchasing lunch at the Husky Den during the lunchtime rush hour. What's the overview? The purpose of this project, or the primary focus, is to build upon the previous field study and the interviews, understanding the way a student dines at the Husky Den, how they choose a restaurant, and how their experiences while standing in a line are during the lunchtime rush hour. It's important to note that this not just includes their dining experience, but also from the moment they arrive at the Husky Den to the moment they leave to the classes in the brief lunch window they normally get. The design question is that hence is that what do UW students experience while in the process of purchasing food at the hub's dining area during the lunchtime rush hour. The motivation behind the study began after H. Taris published a report in 2005 referencing to the role of nutrition in a student's life and how bad eating habits have a direct correlation to poor performance at school. This got me thinking, in a fast-paced university like UW, uh, do small lunch times correlate with bad scores because students do not have enough time in their hands to have lunch? This might also be buoyed by a bad placement or a bad design, which leads to like longer lines at the Husky Den, which means that the students will have to wait a longer time to get their food than actually sit and have their food in peace. Hence, the study focuses on understanding the lunch eating habits of the students who visit the Husky Den for lunch and also finding their pain points to suggest recommendations which will make a smoother experience. And this being a survey rather than an interview will make sure that a lot of students are represented, and this will get a wide range of their opinions as to what they find are the faults in the current system and their design and how it could be improved. Let's look at the setting. This is an image of the ground floor of the hub where the Husky Den food court is located. To just make it clear, the main two restaurants include Dub Street Burgers, which is 36 right here, and 34, which would be Firecracker. There's an area of restaurants right below that, including a market which is 30 right here, which is ETC. It includes a Starbucks cafe that is 60 right here, and also Red Radish, a salad bar, which is located somewhat in the middle of the Husky Den food court. Then it's also important to note that the rest of the area is assigned for seating, as well as the doors which face outside the hub. Also from the field study, I have a few photographs which show the lines formed at Red Radish, the salad bar, and Starbucks below, which again is an organized but long line. The previous research in my field study, the focus was to make sure how do you make the waiting line at the hub's dining area more productive, fast, and efficient to make sure that students can utilize most of the lunch time into eating the food than the actual experience of buying the food. Um, our participants, again, right there were the students who dined during the lunchtime rush hour. And I found out the students usually took a while to figure out where the line ended and how the lines were laid out. Most students also felt restless as they were looking as to how long the lines were and how much time is left for them for the rest of the lunch before they rushed off somewhere. However, this was not an indication of how the students actually feel, and hence the field study was just my observation report, which led me to the interview report where I exhaustively interviewed three students to reveal their stories, their insights, their grievances, their woes, and their main pain points which exist in the current design of the hub's Husky Den. These students usually took us to a typical day for their lunch at the Husky Den, by which their experiences came into light. Many aspects of their experience, from coming in to form the line to choosing a restaurant to placing an order and how much time it takes. All these variables were noted. And the survey report basically intends to build on the previous two, as it's a really good research tool to analyze and find out user behavior on a larger scale. The main problem with the interviews was that it could not be associated with a larger population, as we just interviewed three students, and hence a survey can be done at a way larger scale, which is more useful to find and generalize uh, the results. How was the survey conducted? The survey was conducted using Google Forms, which was an easy platform which gives a shareable link to share into many Facebook groups. I specifically targeted Facebook groups because they have a actual demographic which ranges from freshmen till senior year students. So I could get a good range in the students, and I knew there were almost 160 to 170 people in a group. So I would get I'll still get a good response rate even if a fraction of the students decided to respond to my surveys. The link was hence shared, and 16 responses were recorded and analyzed for the results and recommendations. It is important to note that the survey definitely had a smaller sample size than compared to the actual population of the students which will visit Husky Den at lunch at UW on any given day of any given week, because it's just a hugely large number of students, and I would really need to conduct a survey on a larger scale to make sure it could be generalized to the entire population completely. But this survey genuinely does give us a sense about what the students really a struggle in using this specific design and how it can be improved. The research questions we are specifically targeting during the survey include the demographics of the students who visit the hub during the lunchtime rush hour, and how often do these students use the Husky Den to grab lunch in a week? How much time do they have to have lunch, and which restaurant is frequented more? The logic behind the questions of how much time they have lunch and if they have enough time left directly correlates to if they can have their lunch in peace, and does it interfere with their eating habits. If any student had any bad experience of standing in a long line, they could share that information, which could help us come up with better design plans. Um, the which restaurants do a good or a bad job at serving food at an efficient manner, so that like in the field study we learn from different restaurants about their strengths and weaknesses by if adapted by the other restaurants could make a perfect and efficient system. um, this helps us find the problems of the system as a whole and the benefits of the system as a whole, and hence by learning from each other's faults you can actually make the best design. How do the students feel in general about the long waiting lines at the Husky Den, which refers back to my original design question of the lines being long enough that students are not able to have their lunch in time. The participants. It is important to note that I took this question this time just for the survey and included the term students rather than just customers at the Husky Den, to not just narrow down into a more specific path but also generalize it and make it relatable to a wider UW audience. The students have to be at the enroll at the University of Washington. They have to be aged between 18 to 26. They should be having lunch at the Husky Den at least once a week. So again, this has changed from my previous interview report that they can either have lunch or not. So I even got responses from students who do not have lunch at all from the Husky Den food court, and they also have to attend classes before and after having lunch, and they are connected to internet to take this online survey with the form of Google Forms. Exclusion criteria include that they have ample amount of time to have lunch, which means that they will not be having the struggle than as a regular UW student does, who's not a student at the University of Washington or does not or uses vending machines to grab lunch, which makes the process way easier, or does not want to be bothered by questions about their eating habits, as to the fact that we respect their privacy and it is their choice as to if they want to answer or not. So this is the first result. We found that we have increasing evidence of a dangerous precedent where students have less time to properly finish a meal. This graph is pretty interesting as we have laid out all our 16 responses, and the green portion of the graph signifies the percentage of the time they spend waiting in lines, and the salmon pink portion of the graph indicates the amount of time they have left to eat their food. Most of the students complain that they almost spend all their time spending waiting in lines, that they do not have enough time to have their food. It's also seen that 75% of the students admit that they almost never or never have time to finish eating their meals after purchasing their lunch. And so we got to look into why the students are left with no time by analyzing how they spend their time at Husky Den, which again brings back to a statistic that on an average 67.32% of the students' break is spent waiting in the line, which leads to lesser time for the students to actually have their meal. We saw this in the interview report too, that this dangerous precedent leads to students grabbing the meal and rushing off to the class and either having the meal on the go or in the class itself, or like struggling to find a place to have a meal right outside class. This means that students are speeding up the process of again eating and chewing the food properly, which leads to digestion issues and another other health complications. So, as a recommendation for this result, we recommend spacing out the classes over the day in a way that there's a bigger window towards the lunch. We see at UW and also many other colleges that due to the professors and the students' availability or when they want to study, uh, time around noon is a really big hotspot for grabbing the best classes, which means that a lot of students have their daily schedule in a way that they have classes right before and after lunch. The problem with this is that they only have a 10-minute window to run towards Husky Den to have food, wait in the line, grab their food, and have lunch, and then again rush back to their classes. Um, this can be, however, eliminated if during the lunch window itself, the sort of lunch break could be provided to the students. Now, this is again a difficult scenario to handle as classes are already being scheduled on time for like the past ages. But I have figured out that if you have classes around 12, the classes around 12:30, 1 a.m., 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m., if they could start around 5 minutes late and make into 45-second slots, 45-minute slots rather than 50-minute slots, students would have a 15-minute lunch time, which would be way more than the current time they have, so that they can have their food in peace. If you enable a more efficient system listed as in the field and interview report, it will again ensure a smoother and faster moving line. The second result shows evidence of a high traffic region with a really messy layout. Now, in the field study report, we focused on the market, etc., um, the salad bar, red radish, and the cafe, Starbucks, and we found out problems in the lines and how the systems could learn from each other to form the best and most efficient line design possible. Here we see the foot traffic in each and every restaurant, and we realize where the highest foot traffic falls. I have circled the regions on the map, which corresponds to the highest two-foot traffic. Now, if you notice, Pagliacci and Firecracker, which fall in 34 and 31 respectively, have the highest foot traffic and which is concentrated around a really, really small region, which leads to uneven lines, crowds, and a huge mess. The yellow region, on the other hand, is the second highest foot traffic, where three restaurants are crammed into each other, where they have completely messy, uneven lines, which were again complained by the students during free response. And most of the students feel that they did not find the end of the line very easily. So the implication is that the region with the highest foot traffic should be recognized first of all by the authorities and best organized in a way that it will be laid out in the most efficient manner possible. As students have complained about these places being crowded, it is really difficult for them to find the end of the line or how to stand or how to organize themselves when they have to collect the order or place the order itself. So, as a recommendation, if there would be well marked lines and paths which pave a way for these restaurants that would be like diverging from each other, then all coming together, so nobody would mistake that for a single line. Vending machines and condiments near these restaurants should be avoided, as it would just increase the foot traffic and create an overall commotion. So if you free up the space to make more definitive lines, that would mean that students would have faster moving lines for a more efficient and a smoother process. Seating around these locations should be again made sparse, as it would again lead to more space and people could easily form lines and would be just around the area for the sole intention of purchasing food. The third result is again interesting, and we found it from the free response questions, where we found growing support for the preference of the use of technology among the students. So even in the interview report, we found that a lot of students suggested the idea of using technology and incorporating it into the daily use of purchasing lunch. Now, the restaurants on the app have, as even mentioned by the students, have a lot of options where they can place orders online, and you could just go and collect the food and come back. This saves a lot of time, and especially during a crunch time like the lunchtime rush hour, you really could save the time on standing in the line by ordering the food online. The implication stands that uh, even in like a free response questions where they are where they could answer based on anything, we found overwhelming evidence that students on their free will thought about the concept of adding technology on into the situation, which means that they are not just comfortable with the idea of technology, but they also would be making a preference towards it, as the restaurants around in the world are catching up on this feature. So students are aware of this fact, and it also makes the food purchasing experience way more smoother and simpler and time efficient. So as a recommendation, an online application would definitely help students place their lunch online on the way to the Husky den, and then just pick up their food and completely eliminate the process of standing in line to wait and order for their food. This application could have way more features, and as explained in my interview report, could have a favorites bar which could allow all students like reorder the usual order, or pay online again completely without a card, using your technology itself, which would again lead to a very smooth process. For prioritizing these results and recommendations, I again went with the order I presented them in, as I realized the most important thing we need to address is the increasing evidence which of this dangerous precedent being set, where students have less time to properly finish the eat, which a meal, which forces them to like gobble their food down in a hurry or a rush, which is of course not just a choking hazard but also a really bad eating habit. Because of the growing support and preference of the use of technology, we realized that it could be a really good recommendation for students uh, to solve this problem by again combating by technology. And the evidence of high traffic region with a messy layout could be reorganized in a way again by the authorities, so that it could lead to the most efficient system possible. The next steps I consider would be to research what an ideal portion size for lunch would be and what would ensure minimal wastage. After talking to these, after talking to the students over the interview report, and learning a lot of people's opinions over the survey report, I realized that a major problem among these students would also be about the amount of food they have with them for lunch, as some of them would have to throw the rest of the food away because it's a huge portion for them to again carry on to till they reach home after a day of classes. So we need to figure out an ideal portion size, rather than the normal commercial food portion sizes, which are just a means of consumerism. And except this time we should be focusing on the students, so that they could have an ideal portion size instead of wasting the food. And we could also look into what more options students would be liking to be served on campus, as we saw in the free response questions too, that students would like a bit more diversity in their the meals they would like to choose. And we are also seeing increasing evidence online and even across the dorms about UW faculties involving the students as to which restaurants they would prefer to. um, I would also like to make sure that the layout of the dining hall is accessible for students with special needs and abilities. As to till now, I was researching on this topic with thinking about just again limited range of people. So I did not think about students who might be needing like special need and abilities. So I would make sure that the experience is as smooth for them as for anyone else. Reflecting on this survey, what would I definitely do different is probably make this accessible to a way larger audience, so that I could have a way diverse demographic and not just restricted from a Facebook group. Because looking back at it, probably uh, even though the group is like large and diverse, the Facebook group itself, but I do notice a pattern of certain characteristics which club all the group members together for the same fact that they form the group. So I would like to have it on a completely random basis where students across UW are free to be access my survey. The limitations again, even though it's a bigger sample size than the previous interview, it's not big enough for the entire UW campus. So I would, in retrospect, I would want a bigger sample for the survey. And again, in the survey, since follow-up questions cannot be asked, I cannot ask the motivations behind certain decisions the surveyors made in order to fill out the survey, and also it could lead to response bias. The hardest part again of the survey was to analyze the raw data into making more meaningful results. The most surprising aspect of the survey, which I found, was the people's willingness to actually write the long responses for the free response questions, where I always imagined that people would be lazy enough in surveys that they would not voice their opinion, which was not the case, as I found in this survey, as people really care about how they can make their lives better and how they can make systems as efficient as possible. And definitely the most fun aspect of this survey was to learn about more students' opinions and experiences, as I believe that we grow by only learning about more people's lives and their stories. And especially as while working in HCDE, we need to learn about the users, we need to learn about the consumers. So this was definitely an enriching experience for me. Thank you.